So let me just say that I'm back again with Dr. Vivian Pinn, and we're recording this oral history for the Women in Medicine Legacy Foundation. This is part of their Alma de Morani Renaissance Women in Medicine Oral History Project. And it is the winners of that award that we have the lovely opportunity to hear their life stories. So this is our third interview, and I'm pleased to be back with you again. And I thought, because our last interview left just with a couple comments you'd made about being at the UVA Medical School and saying, you know, how much it meant to you to have students and colleagues who stepped in and included you. But you did say that medical school was a bit of a struggle for you. And because people look at your career and can't probably imagine that, I thought it would be good if you would just tell us what were the struggles in medical school for you, and how did you have the strength to continue through those struggles? So I'm curious about both.
Well, there were the I guess sort of personal kinds of things related to being the only woman and not having a woman mentor there to advise me. No minority faculty. I really benefited from, there was one African-American woman in the class ahead of me, and we became really close friends. And I asked her, how did she do it alone the year before? Because the year before, she was the only African-American student in the school. When I came, at least there were two of us. And after she left, it was just me when she graduated the year before I did. But that gave me a lot of support. And of course, as I think I've mentioned before, my father, I really have to give credit. My mother had died, but my father really, really supported me through those tough times. But other than that, you know, medical school is not easy for anybody. And I had to study, and I think all my classmates studied. And so it was a challenge just, you know, keeping up with the academics, but it was something I expected because you know, I studied through Wellesley, I studied through high school. So I can't say that was an abnormal pressure, stress. It was just what I expected. But having the additional, and I don't want to say pressures, but the additional, the challenges, what were they, being unique in that situation and still in a city where segregation existed, did not make it that easy for me in terms of just surviving. But my life was split between my apartment, which I later had, and the medical school, and I got through that. But how do we, you know, and it was a time when patients were, a lot of men patients were not used to having women doctors. So I had one patient, I picked him up late, but every time I went in to see him, all he would tell me about were the meals. And finally, I went in the day he was to be discharged, and to talk to him about his discharge, and found out all the time he thought I was a dietitian. He never could realize. That's why he kept telling me about his meals. And so, and then you had, I think that Barbara and I were the first physician, medical students of color who were allowed to have non-white patients. And I discovered that from some who finished before I came, and they were not allowed to have white women patients anyway. So, but we were not held to that, and we had patients. And so there were things that were changing while we were there. But I think having Barbara there was a big, in addition to having my lab partners who were very supportive, but there were things that really they would not have related to. And thankfully I had Barbara, who had been through that, as someone I could rely on. But we're often asked, when we hear about episodes of students dealing with sort of racial bias or sexism today, how did we make it through? And I had a long discussion with Barbara about that once, Barbara Starks, who was the woman in the class ahead of me. And I said, Barbara, they always want to know from me, how did we make it through? And you were there a year by yourself before I came, and I'm not quite sure how to respond. And she said, just remind them, which I have done now in almost every instance when I'm asked about it, that we kept our eyes on why we were there. We were there to become physicians, and we had to keep our eyes on the goal for why we were there. And no, we didn't just take stuff and we didn't feel we were being abused. But on the other hand, we would speak up, and we fought the battles when it was important to. And I think I told you about my really raising a big ruckus when the member of the Board of Trustees, Board of Visitors refused to let me have that apartment. I think I mentioned
No,
that.
you didn't. No.
Oh, well, then I'll go back to that. But But so we did speak up, but I think that the issue was that we had to have self-confidence that we could make it through this academic
Okay.
situation. And that if we got so totally distracted by issues of racism or segregation or people poking at us, that we would lose while we were there. So it's so easy to get distracted by these emotional upsets. And so we would talk things over together. And as Barbara said, just remind everyone that, we weren't pushovers. We didn't take a lot of stuff, but we also knew when we had to stop because we couldn't forget our reason for being there was academic. We wanted to be physicians. And that's the advice that I've given to many others now when they're dealing with situations where they feel they're dealing with sexism or homophobia or racism, to not get so, you don't want to be a pushover, but you don't want to get so caught up because you can get so emotionally involved in some of these things. And if you do, it can take away from your ability to focus on your academics of what you're trying to do. And that's really my message from that. So, so it was the episode about I guess I've been talking so much I can't remember what I said to whom. But at the end of my first year, I was in the dorm. Remember, it was an all boys school, all men's school, and the only women students were nurses, and there was a dorm for nurses and women who were in graduate schools. And there was one dorm way across campus that all of the women graduate students stayed in, unless they had an apartment or something of their own. So at the end of the first year, Barbara and I decided we were going to get an apartment together and move out of the dorm.
Okay.
And so some of my classmates had made some suggestions, and they had suggested a group of apartments where most of the merit students lived, and suggested we apply there for a place. And my classmates were being very helpful. So I did apply for us and was told that that was fine. We could have the apartment. And I just said, that there were two of us. We were not a couple, that we would need twin beds instead. And I was told that was no problem. And the person that owned these apartment buildings happened to be on the board of visitors, which happens to be the board of trustees of UVA. So we thought, great. We were in the middle of final exams for the first year. So I asked, could we come over and take a look at the apartment because we hadn't seen them? Said, sure. So I remember it was almost the last day of exams, and Barbara and I went over to look at the apartment. It was nothing fancy, but who cared about that then? So we said, okay, we're set. And a few hours after I got back to the dorm, and I was taking a nap before studying for my last final exam, when I got a phone call. At that time, we didn't have cell phones. There was a phone in the hall, and some student came and got me and said, you have a phone call. And I still remember sitting in that phone booth and hearing this guy say, well, I can't let you have the apartment because I can't put twin beds in. And I hit the ceiling. What do you mean? You changed your mind because you saw us and you saw we were Black, and you don't want to know that wasn't it. I said, well, that's ridiculous. You told us everything was set. And then as soon as you see us, you withdraw the offer. And I was absolutely furious about that. And so I called, I didn't really swear at him, but I came close. But I gave him a good reading down as best I could without going over the line. And I was so furious. And I remember going to and right in the middle of my exams. And I said, you're going to send me this nonsense right in the middle of my exams when I'm trying to study for my exams and get through. And you're calling me with this nonsense. Nobody's going to believe you. So I did get to the student deans at the medical school and to faculty members. And I said, they said, well, there's nothing we can do. Those are privately owned apartments. I said, but this guy is on your board of visitors. And so he is connected with the university. And yet he's going to deny us the apartments. And I know it's because of race. And then they said they look into it. And they said, well, they really couldn't do anything. So I fumed my way through my last final exams. Fortunately, I passed them all. But that was where I really got distressed. Then some of my classmates knew about it. I found out much later, which I didn't know then, but one of my classmates very quietly had contacted his father, who was in some bureau of the federal government, and had looked into it for us, but found out because of some rules, either were too many apartments or there was some rules so that the federal government could not step in. Something to do with ownership, I don't know what. But after that, I really had a soft spot because the guy never said anything to me. was to find out that he actually had looked into trying
Yeah.
to help us. And then another classmate suggested another building. And so we got another apartment. That one was close to campus, worked out really well. And I lived there the last 3 years of medical school. So it worked out better for us. But I've never forgotten that episode. And that's an example of where, no, I didn't sit quiet and just take it. I did as much as I could do, and I raised hell everywhere I could.
Yeah.
But it was an instance, and I thought the school should know if that's somebody on their board of visitors. But evidently, I guess for the politics and the separation of personal ownership versus academic, there was nothing they could do. But that was one of my lovely memories from there. And I think I also told you that, and maybe I didn't, about the class senior party, which they were looking to plan a senior party. And at that time, the Inn was new. And now it's owned by UVA and everything is different. But at that time,
Okay.
it was privately owned. And some of the guys in my class wanted to hold a senior class party at the end. And the word came back that the class could come, but I couldn't come.
Oh my
So
goodness.
now, and then I sort of, when I did the commencement address, I was invited to give the commencement address for all of UVA, which was a marvelous experience for me. And I ended up saying in that address that how the theme of my address to UVA was traditions, how some traditions are good to continue
And
and other
some,
traditions need to change. I said, the very place where you had me sleep last night would not allow me into the doors for a senior class party. And yet here I am in a reserved suite there this weekend. And that shows how some traditions need to change. That's right, unless they brought their dates or their wives. So,
right.
and I didn't have a husband, so so they could have had a class party. I don't know if they did or not, but now UVA owns it and it
Right.
uses it for most of its alumni events. But every time I go, I just get a little tickled at that memory, and I think, well, okay, I'm here now. So
Yeah, but
anyway,
so what year did you graduate medical
I
school?
graduated in 1967, so
Okay.
that would have been the spring of
Yeah.
1967.
But it goes to show you, the overt racism that's still in place all those years. Yeah. Long after we're supposed to be civil rights and
Yeah.
equal. Yeah. 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 Wow. Okay. That helps me paint the picture of where the struggles were. Do you think, had you had women mentors and women of color or people of color as part of
It
your
might have
training,
been
would
nice
it
to
have
just
been
have,
different?
I could maybe go to them about some of the things I was experiencing, but as it turns out, I got through and I
Yeah.
survived and I
Yeah.
didn't get too crazy from the experiences. And I have to credit Barbara and I have to really credit my father with getting
Okay.
me through those episodes. And that's one of the things that I'm working on now, or let's say, I'm on a round table at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, a
Okay.
round table that's looking at how to increase Black men and Black women in science, engineering, and medicine.
Yeah.
And they appointed me as chair of the mental health and behavioral group. But I went, I'm a pathologist. I don't know much about mental health and psychology, but they said, chair said, go ahead, you can handle it, do it. So I have some excellent co-chairs. But in doing that and looking at the stresses, I've really developed an interest in this area. And when we look at
Okay.
the challenges that pre-med students who are students of color, that women who are pre-med students, when they're dealing with all these different isms and biases, they have the financial stresses. Can they afford medical school?
Yes.
They've got family stresses. And it's made us really realize how important, at least for me to really realize how important that mental health and behavioral support is for increasing not only Black men and women, but students in general who are
Yeah.
dealing with academic stress, just the stress of being in school for advanced degree in math, science, engineering, or medicine. And then you're dealing with these other issues, how important it is to provide that support. Well, you can call it mental health support, you can call it emotional support, but at least someone who that a student can talk to get some relief and release some of those anxieties. And so we're seeing and hearing from a lot of programs on their successful programs of getting students in and getting them into medical school or getting them into PhD programs. But what I've started asking is, you say they're successful and you get them through, but what have you built into your programs to provide that emotional support, or for that occasional student who really has a mental health issue or
Yeah.
is about to develop one? What are you building into your programs, your successful programs? You must be providing something, or maybe you're not talking about those you're losing. So
Right.
that's just the tip of the iceberg, but it really has influenced my thinking and the questions that now I'm raising of people with programs, and
Yeah.
trying to get them to think more about the importance of building that support. So you ask, would it have made a difference? I don't know that it would have made a big difference looking back, but at the time it would have been good if, I'm experiencing some of the things as a woman. And you're dealing with classmates who, well, my classmates were pretty good, but at that time in many medical schools where there were women were having some pretty iffy jokes pulled on them. I was lucky they didn't really pull that many. I mean, I think my lab partners protected me, but some of the issues that would come up in classes where, where as a woman you felt maybe you weren't really being included in the discussion, that it would have been nice to have a woman that you could speak to, or with issues well, so I've gone through some without repeating them all,
Yeah.
but to have someone who could relate, that you could at least talk to. And I think that's why I became such a mentor myself, to just make sure
Yes.
if a student felt they need to talk to somebody, maybe about their personal life, maybe their wife or husband didn't understand why they're studying such long hours, or they don't have clothes to wear, or whatever, that if I could just be there they could bounce it off of me, that it would be
Mhm.
helpful to them. And I think that's how I got that loyalty from my students over the years from that. So
Yes.
it may not have made a difference, but at the time it would have made a difference that I would have had someone local to just go in and say, I can't handle this. Can you help me get through it?
I think you've been the trailblazer in helping set what others need, as opposed to having it yourself,
Mm.
both in your career as you move forward. And I'm going to move us forward because last interview, we talked a little bit about how fortuitous your research assistantship through your years at Wellesley, and then through medical school with the Massachusetts General Hospital's pathology lab, turned into this, unexpected opportunity to join them as a resident and teaching
Changed my
fellow.
whole career trajectory. Changed
Yes.
my whole career trajectory. Yes.
Yeah, so we had a little bit of discussion about what that was like and how you ended up there. And then you were just telling us at the end of the last interview how Dr. Flax, am I saying his name right? Flex?
Yes,
Flax?
it was Flax,
Flax.
Flax. Yes,
Yeah,
Martin
how
Flax.
he had moved on to Tufts University and wanted to bring you with him, and you were holding out for a faculty position, which you did get there. So
Yeah, because I figured I'd never get a faculty position. That was my way of nicely saying no. And then he had one for me. So I went and had a wonderful 12 years at Tufts, because I'm still on the board of advisors for the medical school. Um, some of my former students from my years there in the 70s, early 80s, have established a scholarship fund in my name. So there's the Vivian W. Pinn Scholarship Fund at Tufts in my name.
yeah,
And the dean actually gave me the Dean's Medal, and I have an honorary degree from Tufts, which is interesting. And they've actually named the Office of Student Affairs at the medical school is the Vivian Pinn Office of Student Affairs.
I
But I
read
stand
that.
there in front of there's my name on the wall, and I stand there, and students walk by, they have no idea who I am, or that the name on the wall has anything to do with me. And that just tickles me. And I'm like, that's my name up there, but you don't know that. So, but Tufts has been very good to me, even after I left to come to
But what an
Washington.
impression you must have made when you were there. I mean, that's what I'm thinking. You must have really made a lasting impression. And I know you had two roles as in the Department of Pathology as faculty member, but also eventually becoming Dean of Student Affairs, particularly for your interest, as we were just saying, in mentoring students, particularly minority students and women students through those occasions. So I thought, well, yeah, please tell me a little bit more about
Well,
those.
I think probably I was pretty young then. I had gone straight out of residency into that faculty position. And so I wasn't that much older than the students,
Okay.
um, but we worked together very closely and had wonderful programs. And And I was open to students, not just Black students or Latina students, but to all students. And remember, women were just beginning to increase in numbers. So a lot of women students felt they could come talk to me, and I sort of felt that's sort of like when I had no woman to go to. And yet
Exactly.
sometimes women students felt more comfortable speaking to a woman than someone they saw as as a male who might not understand or might think them weak if they had issues. And I just was very close to my students, and I did run renal pathology lab and handled all the kidney and transplant biopsies. And I had a tech, and I loved what I was doing, and I loved teaching about that. And so, fortunately, with the kidney as my special area, I worked closely with the then renal unit at Tufts, and they had some wonderful members of the faculty in that department. We worked together so well in planning curricula and teaching. And I think between the guys and the guys, of course, they were mostly guys, the guys
Yeah.
in the renal unit, and with our path renal, we got teaching awards almost every year. The renal course would get teaching awards from almost every year for what we put on. But the guys were young, we worked together well, and we tried to make the teaching fun, but made sure they learned what they needed to learn. So I enjoyed the teaching. And of course, they knew I think I was a tough teacher, and I must say, I probably taught them far more about the kidney than they needed to know. But even then, and then even my students from Howard will come back and tell me, even now, 30, 40 years later, I still remember that kidney lecture you gave us on kidney disease, on glomerulonephritis, on hematuria. And that tickles me. And I said, I'm sure I gave you more than you need to know, but you never failed. I bet you never failed an answer on the national board exams because you knew what you needed to know. So it was an enjoyable time for me there. I wasn't anxious to go to Tufts, but Dr. Flax being a wonderful mentor, a wonderful department chair, one who did not begrudge my spending time with students, who encouraged my research because I was doing research and some research in collaboration with some of the nephrologists back at Mass General, and then some other research there. Because remember, I trained as a researcher, so that was my
That's right.
area. But he really supported my research and supported my doing other things as long as I kept up with my assignments in the path department, which I did do because I enjoyed pathology and I enjoyed practicing pathology. I enjoyed coming up with diagnoses that others didn't make. I really think I was a pretty good pathologist, and I think I was really good on the kidney. And I missed that in later years when I switched into women's health, when I sort of lost my contact with the kidney world. But I don't know how else to describe. I mean, that sort of summarizes my years at Tufts. I know it's just wonderful. I had great faculty to work with, not just in pathology, but in other departments. We had a great teaching collaboration. As I said, we got a lot of teaching awards from those times from the students.
Yeah.
I loved working with the students. I had a great boss, and I was young enough to be rather forward in what I thought I needed to do, or speaking up from students, or putting forth my diagnosis over maybe what a more senior pathologist thought. And those were great years for me. I think I really matured into myself and into pathology, into that world during those years. So they were great years for me. So yes, because I was so close to so many students, even after I left, I still heard from a lot of the students. I did admissions, I think, almost every Saturday during every academic year. I was there for admissions, interviews, etc. But so close to the students. And after I left, really heard from a lot of students, and we kind of continued that connection. And then when I was installed as the second woman president of the National Medical Association, my former secretary at Tufts, my former secretary assistant, got out to many of my former students. And at that NMA meeting, National Medical Association meeting, I asked, when I gave my address, I asked that my students from Tufts stand, and people were shocked at how many Tufts students had actually come for. And I had one of my former students who was also a minister. I had him give my invocation, had another one to sing. I incorporated them in. And actually, after that time, every year at NMA meetings since, we've had a meeting of Tufts alum graduates. So we've kept that little connection going, even to now. we don't see as many because so many of my students from the 70s are retired and I'm the one still going to meetings, but we see new ones. But that sort of kept me in touch with Tufts through the years. And then when they set up the scholarship fund in my name, which really was a big surprise for me. Well, I said Tufts invited me back to give me an honorary degree. And then after I got to NIH, and then following that, when the students set up the scholarship fund in my name, and then there was like a reunion of they called them Pinn students. And so there was this big gathering of students that I had taught over the years. And that was when they named the Office of Student Affairs for me, which is a big surprise.
wow.
And after that, I was named to the board. And so I'm still on the board. There's a new woman dean at Tufts, which is new, their first woman dean. She is just wonderful. And so I get to meet with her and I stay in touch with other people, especially since they're working on my quote unquote, my scholarship fund. And so I still have a very close connection to Tufts. Unfortunately, we lost Dr. Fox. He retired and then died, so he's no longer there. But I try to give him the credit he deserves, because
As a
without his
mentor.
support, I would never trained at Harvard. I never would have been at Tufts. I never would have been a department chair. I never would have had those ties to pathology. And I like, now that I'm out of women's health, that the world of pathology has welcomed me back. And now I'm again active with the senior fellows of the Association of Pathology Chairs, and because that was my profession for so many
Yes.
years. So I've sort of returned to that in addition to what I'm doing for women's health.
So tell me something, when you talk about medical school being one of the few women, certainly the only woman of color, when you're in your early career there at Tufts, were things different for women? I'm sure you weren't in the majority, or, you were still one of very few. Did your career evolve differently because of that? Did you, you treated as equal, or was there moments even in those early?
Well, going back to Mass General, I think I was the only woman, but there was another woman who came from Sweden to spend a year, and another woman who came from South Carolina to spend a year or two, but I was the only woman trainee. But I never felt at MGH, it was interesting, I never felt that I was treated anything other than equal. The guys that were around, the faculty, they were so supportive. I really felt that was an extremely nurturing environment. And I know after I finished before I finished my training in later years, more women came in, and Dr. Castleman brought in more women and, into the training program. And I think I may have been the only woman with these other two who came, but who was officially resident. But following that, the numbers of women expanded. There were women, they didn't take the first woman intern in internal medicine until around the time I was leaving to go to Tufts. And in surgery was many years later. Now there are women all over the place.
Of course, yes.
But in spite of the few women, there were a couple of women faculty in the department that I was in. But for some reason, I just never felt those same pressures, or that I was different. I was welcomed as part of the group, and we all worked hard together, and we supported each other, and it was a very nurturing.
And being a racial minority didn't color interactions in the same.
No, in fact, what I did, well, here's where I get militant again, but I was at that time the only Black intern and resident at MGH. There was a guy who was a fellow at Peterbilt Brigham at Harvard, and we wanted to see more minority residents in the Harvard teaching system. And so we got up our nerve and went to meet with we were hearing, well, we can't find qualified candidates. So this was Dr. Al Williams, who is now in Los Angeles. So the two of us marched we made an appointment and went to see the dean of Harvard Medical School and said, we think there ought to be more minority interns and residents at the Harvard teaching hospitals. And you all said that you can't find them. So provide us with support and we'll find them for you. And we established what was called the Central Recruitment Council of Boston, of Harvard hospitals. And surprisingly, Dean Ebert, who was the dean then, met with hospital heads and got donations from hospital heads and funded what we set up calling the Central Recruitment Council. And then Dr. Wilbert Jordan, who was a Harvard College Case Western Reserve graduate from medical school, came to the Beth Israel Hospital, which is one of the Harvard hospitals, got
Right.
so involved in this effort, and I have to give him credit. He really did most of it. And what we found was, instead of just recruiting kids to come to apply to Harvard, we got hospitals there to agree to allow externships. So if we can identify students, if you'll bring them in, let them do rotations, we think you'll see that they're much better than they look on paper. And that was what we started doing. And then as Wilbert started traveling around to help recruit students, he found that many of them didn't know how to handle the matching program, which is the way that medical students get their internships or residencies. Yes. And so Wilbert really set up what we basically did mostly after that was advising medical students on how to apply to the national matching program, as well as trying to convince Harvard program directors in Boston to rank some of these students. If there's only one outstanding student at the top of the class, and every hospital program ranks that person, only one person's going to be there. But if you think there's the one, but there are others who are almost as good, rank some of these others. Yes. And so then I left to go to Tufts. So that's when I got Tufts involved. And so then we had Harvard and Tufts. And then one of the faculty members at the Brigham who had been working with us went over to Boston City Hospital. We got BU involved. So it became the Central Recruitment Council for Boston Teaching Hospitals. And so yes, there were very few, but we did what we could to increase the numbers who would come in. And we did see an increase in numbers. And I have to give Wilbert credit. You know, there were those that Al remembers that he brought in, but over the years, and we got anyone who was coming in, they had to work with us and help us recruit others. So that's what I did there, where there were a few of us, a few like me. I got involved to make sure there would be more.
Oh my goodness. I think what an interesting way, rather than just feel the discrimination and the isolation, to actually tackle it positively and say, let's do something about it. Yeah.
And looking back, that was some nerve. I was just an intern and I'm marching into the dean of the medical school's office. But he was good and very gracious.
But what made you nervy like that? Because I think of some of the medical students I've worked with doing ethics and humanities, and I don't know that they would go to the dean. What made you nervy?
I don't know, Al, and I thought this needed to be done, and the only way we could do it, so we went in. I just didn't think about possible repercussions until later. Thought, oh my gosh, you know, he could have kicked us out, and I could have told my program director to get rid of me, and he didn't. He was gracious and instead ended up funding our efforts. So, wow. So I guess I was nervy, but not demanding in a nasty way. You learn how to seek help and seek assistance and seek support, but you have to do it in a way where you're not just demanding, but you're trying to give reasoning. Right. And I think that was something I learned along the way that I needed to do. And so I didn't feel at all uncomfortable until I thought about it years later, but I seem to have done that so many times during my career.
Okay. I thought I'd just ask, you mentioned the National Medical Association, and you mentioned the fact that, you know, a lot of the Tufts reunions happened there, but also that you were one of the presidents, I believe 1989, I think you were the president. Yes. But I thought, you know, we always ask people about their mentors, and you've talked very eloquently about some of yours, but I wonder about how can professional organizations be mentoring? You know, because you got involved, I wanted to know the story of how did you end up at the NMA, and what did that mean to you to be part of that organization?
Well, the NMA, as I think I have said to you before, was established years ago when Black physicians were not allowed to be members of the AMA. And so I knew about the NMA, the National Medical Association. I knew about it. But I had not been that involved because I'd been at UVA and there were no Black doctors, so there was no chapter of NMA there. Okay. And I got to Boston and there was a local, it was called the New England Medical Society, which was the local organization of the NMA. But how I really got involved is looking back on the Ken Edlin case and I was very involved. I don't know how many remember, and I won't go into because that could be another whole discussion, but Ken
Uh-huh.
Elin was a chief resident at the Boston City Hospital, and he did an abortion that was within the legal rights at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, um, a case was brought against him that was a fallacious case. They
Oh,
insisted that he delivered the fetus, and somebody claimed they were in the operating room and looked at the clock and saw him smother the baby till the baby was dead for so many. Eventually, the case eventually he
and he was
lost.
a physician of color, I'm going to assume.
Yes, he was a black chief resident at Boston City Hospital.
Okay.
And actually, as it turned out, the clock was out for repair. So the guy who testified that he watched the clock. But it was real stressful for Ken. But anyway, we were concerned because he was one of our black physicians. He was a chief
Mhm.
resident. BU did not pick up his legal defense. So when they indicted him, he had to then find his own lawyer. And I felt, I'm always jumping on cause that I thought he shouldn't have to do that. And I had some good connections. So I started calling people that I knew to help get set up his defense fund and to give him a look at this young guy and he's doing well. And now they've gone after him for abortion and we need to show him support. So I did. So we were thinking that we need to get the national organization involved. And so a group of us then, I was still a resident, but a group of us then went to the national meeting of the National Medical Association to make a plea in the House of Delegates that there be a resolution in support of Ken Elin and to provide national support for him and his defense fund. So that was when I first went to an NMA meeting. And I got there and saw excellent science.
What
I
year would this be?
This was about 70, when was this case brought? 72, 73, somewhere
Okay.
in there.
Yeah.
And I saw so many black physicians, although NMA has integrated physicians, they're not all black, but there were these black physicians from all over the country, many of whom I knew their families, many of whom I'd never heard of before, in leadership positions. That I sat in that House of Delegates, and of course, they said we could only bring that if we were delegates. So we knew we had to come back the next year. So I came back as a delegate, and I have not missed a convention since. So that was early
Okay.
70s and got
Okay.
really involved. But it was because of Ken Elin's case that I really got involved with NMA. And of course, I can't learn to just sit quietly as I should because I got all involved in NMA politics and the meetings and the activities of the NMA, and actually became the second woman president of the NMA. Now we've had many other women, but I was the second. Edith Irby Jones, who was the one who integrated the University of Arkansas Medical School in Little Rock, which was
Mhm.
really a historic event. Edith was very involved in the NMA, and she became the first woman president. So I
Okay.
said she did such a great job as president that when I became the second woman president, I was just the NMA president. She really did such a great job that I didn't have to fight the battles that she did. And she was so great that it was just smooth sailing for me as president. And of course, I have not missed a meeting since then. And as I said, I'm now president or chair of the Past Presidents Council, which is a group of all past presidents, and probably one of the oldest active members in terms of when I was elected as president. We have some age older, but not
Mhm.
many who are still alive who were in office before I was. In fact, I think
Right.
there's only one still alive who was in office before I was. And so I
You have
spend
the memory of that organization to
that's
draw on.
I think I've sort of become the grandma of NMA because people always called me, how do we do this and what do we do about that? But that's another area that keeps me very busy because I'm doing a lot of things with NMA and very involved with NMA. And I've enjoyed being a part of that. And actually being president of NMA really was helpful to me when I went to NIH because as president of NMA, I had to meet with different Congress people. Several times I was able to testify or provide testimony on behalf of the NMA. Reporters were calling for what is the NMA stance on
So it was a
this and
very
that.
public profile.
That's right. So I learned to I'd be called and I'd have to on my feet right off the top of my head, respond to questions about various health issues, various health legislation, and then actually interacting with people on Capitol Hill, which I had not done before. And at the same time, through the Association of Path Chairs, I was also in that position of going to meet with Congress people. So what my association with the NMA really helped me with both my Path Chairs role on the national level, but
Yeah.
also when I then went to NIH, and the second day I was at NIH, I had to testify before Senator Kennedy and the Education, Labor, Welfare Committee, whatever that committee was,
Yeah.
as the expert on women's health, just my second day in the job. But I did it, and I wasn't as nervous as I might have been because I had had that experience representing the NMA. So NMA has been very valuable. I mean, I'd like to think I've given it energy and time, but I have gained a lot through my
Yes.
associate, and I have a lot of good friends who are members that I met through the NMA, or people that I've known, but we come closer because we work together on things through the NMA.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard you mention it. I've seen it in different accounts of you, but I thought, yeah, I just want to hear a little more. How did that become as important as it has been in your life? So
And
that's,
I must say, when I was, they had a strong internal medicine section, a strong surgery section, a strong radiology section, but they did not have a pathology section. And remember, I was a pathologist at the time I was president. So one of the things I'm proud of is that I managed to get started a section on pathology, which there aren't that many Black pathologists, and we included others, but now it has really blossomed and it's really going forward. So after all these years, it survived really well. But that's where I tie in all my different aspects of my life and my career.
yeah.
And at the same time, when I went to NIH, they set up a women's health section in recognition of the new efforts on women's health.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so for
So
many
your
years,
career has been expanding the NMA.
so for many years, there's been a women's health section, and then there was a Vivian Pinn lecture that was going on. And when I was at NIH, it was great because I got to bring a lot of folks from NIH, a lot of folks that we had worked with through NIH to the NMA to speak. So I sort of seen my career integrated in all the aspects of both the pathology and Association of Path Chairs, as well as being in women's health and then being in academia. All of these and being in NMA all sort of integrate across the board in different ways.
Okay. And that's, I'm thinking of you at Tufts in this early part of your career. Did you have grand ambitions for what you wanted to achieve in pathology? Because you move on, and I'm going to ask you about that. You do leave Tufts, you pick up the chair of the pathology department.
I was very happy there, and I was not thinking of anything grander or anything more. I was very happy there. And then I was offered this position. I had been offered other jobs, but I decided to stay at Tufts with Dr. Flax.
Okay.
And a number of other folks who had been at MGH came over with him. So it was a very comfortable group. And then the other pathologists that he hired, we all it was a very small department, but we became very close. Again, it was a very close working department, and no
Was
major.
that due to good leadership or good luck?
I think good leadership of Dr. Flax and the kind of people he hired, and the fact that he was tough. And I can remember my first autopsy protocol. I'm a Wellesley grad. I thought I could write very well. And he went through it and marked it up. And I went, oh my God, and I have been like him ever since, marking up what people give to me, but saying, this is only to make sure you will get it. But I said, no, I'm not an English major, but I really believe things in written documents is going to have my name on it. It's got to be written correctly. So, but I think it was Dr. Flax's leadership and the kind of people that he hired to bring into the department. So it was a very nurturing department. And I was offered this job of chairmanship at Howard. And I went down to interview, but I'd been in Boston then for over 20 years between college and training. And I wasn't anxious to go, but didn't know. But my father had had a heart attack by then. He was in Virginia. And so the thing that was attractive to me was that I'd be closer to him in Virginia than staying in Boston. But I couldn't decide. And I was at a AAMC meeting. I think I mentioned my role in that. Associate of Academic Medical Schools, American Association of Academic Medical Schools. And a guy who was then a dean of a medical school, but I had met him earlier because he had been a chair of pathology. So I'd met him through the PATH group.
Okay.
And he always sort of followed my career to see what I was doing. And so he asked me what I decided. And I said, well, I can't make up my mind. You know, I'm still have this job offer for a chair, but I like what I'm doing. So he said, you've got to decide if you're going to go administrative and be a dean and go administration, or if you're going to be a pathologist, you might as well run your own department. And I'm thinking, well, I still want to be a pathologist. And he said, you need to get off the fence. And it was Dr. Marvin
Because you
Dunn.
had the two roles at Tufts.
Yes, I had the two
Dean and
roles, administration and
associate
pathology.
dean.
And he said, you got to get off the fence, go one way or the other. And so I said, okay. And I'm thinking about my father. And I said, okay. So I saw my future being in pathology. So
Okay.
that's how I then ended up. And when he made, it's funny how passing comments can influence decisions.
Yeah.
And throughout my life, I can think of instances where, like I told you how I got into MGH at that cocktail party. I can remember Dr. Dunn making that comment. And from that, I decided to go ahead and take the job at Howard. And that's how I decided to leave Tufts, to get closer to my father. So,
Okay. And what was that like, being at a historically Black college after years of being the one minority, the two minorities, the
that's
one?
right. And then I was no longer, except there were only two women department chairs there. And then for a while, I was the only one. But remember, I had grown up in segregated schools and a segregated high school. So I had been in a predominant, well, in fact, an all Black environment in Virginia when I was growing up. So it wasn't like I had not been in that environment. And I enjoyed the faculty there, and I loved the students. And what I found was that a number of the students in the classes there were students I had tried to get to Tufts who'd actually come to Howard. So I knew them, a lot of them, I knew them from their records, from their applications to Tufts, and loved with the students and loved being in Howard. That was great. I had some rough times in my department because the former chair was still there and resented every change that I wanted to make.
Oh,
And
is that normal, Vivian? Like
yeah, well, except I'm not
that a
sure.
chair steps down and stays? Is that?
I'm not sure that everyone is as vindictive as he was, but
I see.
and I learned but I would say I came through at Harvard and Tufts where we'd have faculty meetings and discuss things we want to bring about for changes. And I would discuss those in my faculty meetings and nobody would say anything. And when the meeting was over, they'd come up one by one and say, I agree with what you said, but I didn't want to agree in front of Dr. Whatever, because I knew he would be upset because I was changing. So that's the kind of situation I was in.
Do you think some of that acrimonious behavior was about his ego, or the fact that you were a woman and a minority making changes?
Well, he was a minority himself, so that
okay.
Yeah, because but we
Right.
had a very diverse faculty. I must say, our faculty was I think it was his ego. I said to him, I didn't move you out as chair, but I think the fact that I was a woman, I was not as forceful as maybe someone else might have been. And the fact that he had been there so many years, he had protection from the administration because he had been chairs for many. But it has helped me to give a lot of advice to people moving into new positions about how they should or should not deal with previous chairs if they're still around.
Can you give it like 2 nuggets? What would you say?
First, you need to make sure the roles are clarified. You need
Okay.
to make sure that the faculty understands that you're coming in with new ideas. You need to make sure you've got your support and bring someone with you who is on your team, because if you come into a room where everybody has been working just with the other person and you're the only outsider, it's going to be difficult to bring in changes.
Right, they have their own little dynamics already there.
And you have to decide, depending on the department of institution politics, whether you want evolution or revolution. And that's something you have to decide when you see the situation you're in.
And there weren't a lot of women chairs for you to connect with and learn from.
I was the third woman in the United States to serve as a department chair in academic pathology. The first was Nancy, and I'm blanking on her name, who was at USC. And I met her once on a trip to California because she and Dr. Flax had trained together at the University of Chicago, and he wanted me to meet her. So I did meet her on one of my trips to California. And the second was Nancy Davis. I can't believe I've forgotten her first name. That's old age. I'm blanking on her name. It'll come up later in the interview, and I want to make sure I get it right. Nancy, oh, what was it? Then the second was a woman from Texas who was chair of a clinical pathology group. And when I became a chair, she was still there. And then I would have been the third woman in the US to chair an academic pathology department. Now there are many women chairs, but when I came in, so it was all the guys with their wives, and then my husband, and he would laugh because, you know, they'd have fashion shows and teas, and I'd say,
and he'd be going to those.
That's right. So he didn't go to many, he'd go to a few, but he would try to get on the golf course or something, because everybody was there with their wives except me, you know, because I was the woman. So it was interesting. So, but the path chairs, I think, were very receptive, probably because Dr. Flax introduced me to them. So he paved the way for me. Yes.
Okay, so that group was a more congenial group.
Yeah. So yes, outside of my institution, and they were very helpful to me in setting up new curricula and knowing how to handle lab problems and the whole issue of pathology and how it was being reimbursed was changing with congressional work that year. And I could call on Dr. Flax or call on other chairs, and they were always very helpful. So I'm losing my voice in a sense.
I heard that. I was just going to say, I think I've worked you hard enough today. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
And it's fine. We have another interview coming. We'll pick up on a couple more questions about your time at Howard, and we'll then begin to understand the next transition, which is far away from pathology. So I'm curious to hear.
Right.
Yeah. So if that's okay, I know I have been talking to you for a full hour, and people do get weary after that.
Yeah.